Hey, my name is Dean Marsh. I'm 33 years old, and I make my living off other people's doors. I live in a small house at the end of Beaumont Road, just outside Hartwell, Georgia. The kind of town where the hardware store still writes receipts by hand and most everybody's grandfather is buried within a mile of the same white church. My shop sits on Main between a laundromat and a shoe repair place that closed in 2019 and never came down. Hartwell Lock and Key. My name isn't on it. The man who built it was named Earl, and when he sold it to me 8 years ago, he told me to leave the sign alone, that people trust a name that's been around longer than they have. I left it alone. I'm a locksmith. I cut keys, rekey deadbolts, pull broken bolts out of doors that swelled shut over a wet winter, change the hardware on houses that just sold so the new owners can sleep without thinking about who else still has a key. It is not the kind of work anybody dreams about. Nobody grows up wanting to spend their afternoons on their knees in a stranger's doorway with a pick gun and a flashlight in their teeth. But I'm good at it, and there's a quiet to it I've never tried to explain to anyone. Because the people who'd understand already know, and the people who wouldn't would just look at me funny. Here's the thing about my trade that I've never said out loud. Most people think a lock is about keeping the world out. It isn't. A lock is a promise you make to whoever's already inside, that they're safe, that you decided they were worth protecting, that when the dark comes, you have done the one small thing in your power to hold it on the other side of the door. That's all a deadbolt is. A man saying, "The people in here matter to me." I've installed a few thousand of those promises. I'd never been on the inside of one that was about me. My days went like this. I opened the shop at 7 and turned the deadbolt on my own door first, out of habit, the way some men crack their knuckles. I cut keys. I answered the phone. I drove out to jobs, a recce on Dogwood, a stuck patio slider on the Lake Road, a lockbox for a realtor who always paid late. I came home around 6, ate something out of the pan I cooked it in so I wouldn't have to wash a plate, and watched the rain come down over the field behind my house until it was late enough to call it a day. The shop phone rang plenty. The house phone never did. I used to tell myself there was a real difference between being alone and being lonely, and most days I almost believed it. My father walked out on a Tuesday in October when I was 7 years old. I remember it was a Tuesday because it was trash day, and I remember he didn't slam the door. That was the part I could never get past. He closed it soft, careful, like he didn't want to wake anybody, like leaving was a courtesy he was doing us. A man who could close a door that quietly had thought about it for a long time. My mother raised me on a cashier's salary and a stubbornness that I inherited whole, and she did fine. We did fine. But I grew up into the kind of man who shows up, who answers, who fixes the thing before you have to ask twice. I think part of me decided early that I would be the opposite of a softly closed door, and I never quite managed to ask myself who, exactly, I was staying open for. That night in early March, the rain had been coming down since noon. Not a storm, just that steady gray Georgia rain that settles in like it's paying rent. I'd locked up the shop late, eaten standing at the counter, and I was somewhere on the soft edge of sleep around midnight when I heard it. 3 knocks, low on the door, knee height. So weak I thought at first it was the wind throwing a branch against the porch. Then it came again. 3 knocks, low, and a small voice underneath the rain saying, "Hello? Please, I am not a man who scares easy, but a knock at midnight rearranges your blood." I went to the door in my socks and my work pants, and I looked through the side glass, and there was nothing at eye level. And then I looked down. She couldn't have been more than 7. brown hair plastered flat to her head from the rain, a thin pink jacket 2 seasons too small with a zipper broken, soaked through to a nightgown underneath, white rubber boots with cartoon ducks on them. The only thing about her that fit. She was hugging herself, shaking, and on a cord around her neck she wore a small brass key, a key I recognized, because I had cut it myself 2 weeks before and handed it to a little girl in a motel parking lot so she'd feel like she was in charge of something. I opened the door, and the cold and the rain came in with her. "You're the key man," she said, teeth going. "You fixed our door." "I am," I said. "Honey, where's your mama?" She shook her head hard, and her face crumpled the way a child's face does right before the truth comes out of it all at once. And she looked up at me with her whole heart breaking in her eyes, and she cried, "I need a dad before Sunday or I'm gone." I'll tell you the truth. For about 3 seconds I almost stepped back. Not from her, from it. I was tired. The rain was loud. Whatever this was, it had teeth. And I had spent 33 years being careful about what I let through my door. And every instinct I owned said, this is more than you can carry. Close it gently, the way it was once closed on you. I felt my hand move on the edge of the door. Then I looked at the duck boots, and the broken zipper, and the brass key I'd cut with my own 2 hands lying against a wet nightgown, and a child standing alone on my porch at midnight because somewhere in her short life she had decided that I was the safest grown man she knew. And I have never once in my life been able to close a door soft. "Okay," I said. "Okay, come in out of the rain first. We'll figure out the Sunday part." I got her inside, wrapped her in the wool blanket off the back of my couch, and I had just put the kettle on when headlights swung wild into my yard and a car door slammed and somebody came running through the rain. She hit my porch hard enough to rattle the glass. Brown hair half out of a low knot and stuck to her neck, a waitress apron still tied over jeans. One sneaker untied, no coat at all, because she'd clearly run out of somewhere without thinking. Her eyes were red and swollen, not crying in the moment but past it, the dried-out red of someone who'd been crying for hours and had no tears left to spend. She saw the girl through my window and made a sound I'd never heard a person make, half a sob and half her daughter's name. I opened the door before she could pound on it. "She's here," I said. "She's safe. She's dry. Come in." The woman went straight past me and dropped to her knees in front of the girl and held her face in both shaking hands, checking her over the way you check a thing you almost lost. And she was saying, "Junie, Junie, you can't. You can never." And the girl was crying into her shoulder. And I stood by my own kettle in my own kitchen, feeling like a man who'd walked into the middle of someone's life and didn't have the manners to leave. When she finally stood up, she kept one hand twisted in her daughter's blanket like she'd never let go of it again. She turned to me, and I watched her remember all at once that she was in a stranger's house at midnight, that she didn't know me, that she had nothing and no one, and now this too. "I'm so sorry," she said. She was asleep. The door was chained. "I don't know how I'm Nora. This is Junie. You're the locksmith. From the motel." "Dean," I said, "sit down before you fall down. Both of you. The water's almost hot." I'd met them 2 weeks earlier and forgotten them the way you forget most jobs. A call from the Dogwood Motor Court out on the highway, room 14, a single mother who said someone had tried her door handle in the night and the motel's lock was a joke and she'd pay whatever it cost. I'd driven out and found a deadbolt with a strike plate held by 2 short screws into rotten frame. The kind of lock that exists to make a tired person feel better, and nothing else. I'd fixed it right. Anchored it into the stud, no charge for the screws, and while I worked, the little girl had sat on the bed watching me with the unblinking focus children give to people doing something with their hands. When I finished, I'd cut her a key of her own off my pocket-blank cutter, a real working brass key to nothing in particular, and told her she was in charge of locking the door now, that it was her job, and she had taken it like I'd handed her the deed to a kingdom. I drove off and didn't think about them again. She'd thought about me, though, when the world ended. Mine was the door she ran to. I made the tea. Junie fell asleep against her mother before she finished half of it. The dead weight sleep of a child whose body has decided the emergency is over. Nora sat at my kitchen table with both hands around the mug like she was trying to remember what warm felt like. And slowly, in pieces, between long silences I didn't try to fill, the story came out. Her husband's name was Adam. He'd died 2 years ago. Not a car wreck, nothing fast, the slow kind, 11 months of it. The kind that empties out a savings account and then a retirement account and then a house. By the time it was over, there was no house. There was Nora and Junie and a stack of bills with the hospital's name on them and a job waiting tables at the Hartwell Diner that paid in coins and aching feet. They'd been at the Dogwood 4 months. She was looking for a real place. She was so close, she kept saying she had almost enough for first and last on a duplex over on Carter Street. She just needed a little more time. And there were Adam's parents, the Ashfords. Vivian and Charles. Money so old it had moss on it. A house out on the lake with a gate and a name. They had never thought Nora was good enough for their son. A girl from nowhere with a community college degree she never finished. And when Adam died, they'd grieved by deciding the only acceptable version of their granddaughter was one that lived under their roof and not in a motel with a waitress. Their lawyer had filed for an emergency change of custody. The hearing was Monday morning, and the Ashfords' attorney had arranged, very generously, very reasonably, that Junie would come stay with her grandparents starting Sunday to ease the transition, they'd written, as if it were a kindness pending the judge's ruling. She heard us, Nora said, and her voice finally broke on it. On the phone. My lawyer was on speaker. He said if the judge walks in and sees a kid living in a motel with a single mom working doubles, against a mansion and 2 grandparents and a college fund, he said, be realistic, Nora. He said, unless something changes, unless it looks like a real stable 2-parent home, we're going to lose her on Monday. She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. She's 7. She heard 2-parent home and Sunday, and she did the math the only way a 7-year-old can. I looked at the little girl asleep against her mother, soaked clean through, the brass key I'd cut still around her neck. I need a dad before Sunday, or I'm gone. She'd run 2 miles in the rain at midnight to solve a custody case with the only tool a child has, which is to find a grown-up and ask them, straight out, to love her enough to keep her. I didn't say anything for a long time. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have been a lie or a speech, and I'm no good at either. So I did the thing I'm good at instead. I got up, and I put new sheets on the spare bed I'd never once used, and I told Nora the 2 of them were sleeping under a real roof tonight, with a real deadbolt I'd installed myself, and that we'd sort the rest in the morning when the world looked less like the end of itself. She started to argue. People like Nora always start to argue, because charity from a stranger has a price more often than not, and she'd learned that the hard way. I held up a hand. It's not charity, I said. It's a locked door and a dry bed. I've got both going spare. You can pay me back by not making me stand here arguing at 1 a.m. She almost smiled. It was a thin thing, barely there, but it was the first crack in 2 years of bracing, and I saw it. They didn't leave in the morning. They didn't leave for a lot of mornings. I won't pretend I had a plan. I didn't. What I had was a spare room, a shop that gave me my days, and a slow dawning sense over that first strange week that my house had been waiting for noise the way a lock waits for the right key, quietly, for years, without ever knowing what it was missing until the thing slid home. I gave them the apartment over the shop. It had sat empty since Earl's day, full of his boxes, but it had 2 real bedrooms and a kitchen and a bathtub that worked, and it took me 3 evenings to haul out the junk and another 2 to make it right. Nora insisted on paying rent. I let her name a number, and she named one that was honest and too high for what she had, and I knew it was about her dignity and not the money, so I took it, every dollar, and put it in an envelope in my desk drawer that I figured I'd hand back to her someday when she'd stop fighting me about it. She was not a woman who needed carrying. I learned that fast, and I learned it the way you learn most true things, by being wrong first. The second day I went up to fix a cabinet hinge that wouldn't sit right, and she was already at the stove and the radio was on, and Junie was at the table with crayons, and Nora looked at the hinge I was fussing with and said, without turning around, "It's not the hinge. The screw hole's stripped. You need a longer screw and a matchstick, or you'll be back up here in a week." She was right. I'd have caught it eventually. She caught it in a glance, over her shoulder, while making eggs. The woman who'd come to me with nothing knew her way around a broken house better than half my customers, because poor people learn to fix things, or do without, and she'd been doing both for 2 years. After that, I stopped trying to do things for her and started doing them with her, which is a different and better thing, and we fell into a rhythm I didn't have a name for. She worked her diner shifts. I worked the shop. In the evenings, Junie did homework at my counter while I cut keys, and she got it in her head that she wanted to learn the machine, and I let her, guiding her hands, and she'd hold each finished blank up to the light and check the cuts against the original like I'd shown her, serious as a surgeon. She got good. She gave the keys away to everyone, to her mother, to the diner cook, to Della, who ran the laundromat next door. 1 key each. No lock attached. Just a small brass thing that said, "I made this, and I'm giving it to you." I taught her the trade without meaning to teach her anything. I told her the thing I tell everybody. Most people think a lock keeps the world out. It mostly keeps your people in, where it's warm, where you can find them. She thought about that for a long time, the way she thought about everything. And then she said, "So a key is how you let somebody be your people." And I had to go in the back room for a minute over a 7-year-old's grammar. Della was the one who said it plain. She came over one afternoon while Nora was on shift, leaned on my counter, watched Junie carefully ruining a key blank and said, "You know a child doesn't run 2 miles in the rain to a stranger." I told her I'd just done a good job on a motel lock. Della has been alive 61 years and has buried a husband and raised 4 kids and runs a laundromat, which is to say she is not a woman you can lie to easily. A child, she said, doesn't knock on a stranger's door at midnight. She knocks on the door of the one grown man in her whole life who didn't make her feel like a problem to be solved. That's not a lock you fixed, Dean. Mind what you do with it. Then she took her clean towels and left me standing there. Nora and I talked more than I'd talked to anyone in years. Not about anything, about everything. The slow, useless conversations of 2 tired people at a kitchen table after a child's gone to bed, with cold tea between us neither of us drank. I found out she laughed with her whole face when she finally let herself, and that she was funny in a dry, sideways way that snuck up on you. She told me my cooking was a war crime. She told me I locked my own front door out of habit, even when I was already inside, and that it was the saddest thing she'd ever seen. A man bolting himself in against an empty house. I told her she'd run barefoot through a rainstorm with no coat for her kid, and she had no right to call anybody sad. She conceded the point. We were, I think, two people who had each privately decided long ago that the warm part of life had already happened to other people, and we were each surprised to find the other one sitting across the table. One night, late with Junie asleep, the rain came back and we sat listening to it. And Nora was quiet for a long while, and then she said, not looking at me, Adam was sick for 11 months. Do you know what that does to your hands? I learned to do an IV line. I learned to read the numbers on the machine. I learned to lift a grown man and turn him so he didn't get sores. And his parents came twice in 11 months. They sent a check and a card. And now they want to stand in front of a judge and explain to him that I'm the one who can't provide a stable home. She finally looked at me. I'm not telling you so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because you keep looking at me like I'm something that broke. And I need you to understand I'm not broken. I'm just tired. There's a difference. I didn't tell her it would be okay. I'm glad, looking back, that I didn't, because I didn't know if it would be, and she'd had enough of people promising her things. I said the only true thing I had. I believe you, I said. And then, because she'd given me hers, I gave her mine. I told her about a Tuesday in October when I was 7, about a door closed so soft it didn't even click, about a boy who decided he'd spend the rest of his life being a man who answered when somebody knocked, and how he'd done it so well and so long that he'd somehow ended up just as alone as the man who left. I'd never told anyone that. I'd never put the two halves of it side by side, the leaving and the staying, and seen that they were the same shape. Nora reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't squeeze it or pat it or any of the things people do to make a moment mean something. She just left it there, warm, over my knuckles while the rain came down. I didn't move. I sat there a long time after. The way you sit when you've finally felt something you spent years building a wall around. And I understood, quietly, without saying it, without doing anything about it, that the door I'd kept so carefully closed since I was 7 was standing open, and that the two people who'd walked through it were the last two people on earth I could afford to let be taken. That was Thursday. Sunday was 3 days out. The lawyer for the Ashfords called the shop on Friday, which told me everything about how they did things, straight to the man, not the woman, as if Nora were the property under discussion and I were the new owner they needed to negotiate with. Mr. Marsh, he said, smooth as a fresh-cut key. I represent Charles and Vivian Ashford. I understand Nora and the child have been staying at your residence. I want to be sure you understand the position you're putting yourself in. I understand it fine, I said. The Ashfords are prepared to be very generous to everyone who helps make this transition smooth for their granddaughter, he said. And let it sit there, the generous, so I'd know exactly what it was. I hung up. They came in person Saturday morning. I should have known they would. People like the Ashfords don't trust a thing to a phone if there's a chance to do it standing over you. A black SUV pulled up out front of the shop, and Vivian Ashford got out of it the way money gets out of a car, like the ground should be grateful. Charles came behind her, slower. A man who'd long ago decided his wife would do the talking, and his job was to stand there being expensive. She wore a coat that cost more than Nora made in 3 months. And she looked at my shop, at the old sign, at the key blanks on the wall, with an expression like she'd found something on her shoe. Nora was behind the counter. Junie was in the back doing homework. I came out from the workroom wiping my hands on a rag. Vivian didn't waste time. We're not unreasonable people, she said to me, not to Nora. We understand a young widow can be overwhelmed. We're prepared to help her get back on her feet. a fresh start, somewhere far from all this. She glanced around the shop again. We'd want Junie settled with us, of course, properly, with every advantage, and we'd see that Nora was comfortable. Very comfortable. We can be quite generous to a mother who understands what's best for her child. There it was again. Generous. They had a check in their pocket and a number on it, and they had driven all the way out to Beaumont Road to buy a little girl from her mother and call it kindness. I started to step forward. I felt it rise in me, all the years of it, every door ever closed soft, and I wanted to say something that would take the floor out from under the woman. But before I could move, Nora came around the counter, and I shut my mouth, because the framework of that whole moment changed the second she chose to speak, and I understood that the most important thing I could do was stand beside her and let her. She didn't raise her voice. That's what I'll remember. She walked up to Vivian Ashford until they were a foot apart, and she spoke quiet and level, like she was reading off a receipt. "For 11 months I turned your son so he wouldn't get bed sores," Nora said. "I learned his medications. I held the bowl when he was sick. I read to him at 3 in the morning when he couldn't sleep for the pain, and at the end I held his hand and he was looking at me." She let that sit. "You came twice. You sent a card. And now you've driven out here to offer me money to disappear and tell yourself it's love." She didn't blink. "I'm not overwhelmed, Vivian. I've never once been overwhelmed. I have been alone, which you mistook for the same thing because you've never had to do anything alone in your life. You're not going to buy my daughter. There isn't a number. I'd live in a worse motel than the Dogwood before I'd hand her to people who think a child is a thing you acquire to replace the one you lost." The shop was dead silent. Charles Ashford had gone the color of old putty. And Vivian made the mistake people like her always make, the one the framework would call exposing your own logic in public. She forgot I was standing there. She forgot Junie was 20 feet away in the back. She dropped the generous and showed the thing underneath it. "That child," she said, low and vicious, "is the only thing left of my son, and I will not have her raised in poverty by a waitress and some handyman in a building that smells like a laundromat. She is ours." "Adam would want—" "Adam," said a small voice from the doorway of the back room, "told me Grandma made him feel like a trophy." We all turned. Junie stood there in the doorway with her homework still in her hand, and she was looking at her grandmother with the flat, unafraid clarity that only children and the very old ever have. He said it once. He said, "Don't ever let anybody love you like a trophy, Junebug." I didn't know what it meant. I know now. She looked at her grandmother a moment longer, and then she walked across the shop, past her, and took my hand. Not Nora's. Mine. She held my hand and stood there next to me and looked up at the two of them and didn't say another word, because she'd already said the only thing that mattered. Vivian Ashford left. Charles followed. The SUV pulled out, and the room let out a breath it had been holding for 2 years. The hearing was Monday. Their lawyer didn't show up with much heart in it. There's not a lot you can do with a client who said she is ours in front of a witness. And the judge, a tired woman with reading glasses who'd clearly seen every shade of this, asked Nora exactly one real question, which was whether the child was safe, fed in school, and loved. Nora said yes. Junie, asked by the judge if she wanted to add anything, stood up on her own and said, "I have a key to 2 doors now, and I made keys for everybody, and I'm not gone." The judge took her glasses off and looked at her for a moment, and then she ruled, and we walked out of that courthouse into the George's son, a family that no court could split, even if no court had yet thought to put it that way. We didn't say anything about the rest of it for almost a week. The thing between Nora and me. We'd been so busy being a wall around Junie that neither of us had turned to look at the other one straight on, and now the danger had passed and there was nothing left to hide behind, just the two of us, and a quiet that had to be filled with the truth or with nothing. It happened on a Friday night, of course it did, on the steps of the shop after Junie was asleep upstairs, the streetlight buzzing and the town gone quiet. Nora came down to sit with me the way she did most nights now, and we sat there a while, and then I made myself do the hardest thing I know how to do, which is open my mouth before I've planned the whole sentence. "I owe you an apology," I said. She looked at me sideways. "For what?" "For most of the last month," I said. I told myself I was being decent. "A locked door and a dry bed," I said. Like I was doing you a favor. But I knew by the third day it wasn't a favor, and I kept calling it one. Because the second I called it the real thing, I had something I could lose. And I have spent my whole life arranging things so I had nothing to lose. I made myself keep going. My father closed a door soft when I was 7, and I've been a man who never closes doors ever since. And somewhere along the way, being open and being empty started to feel like the same safe nothing. And then a kid knocked at midnight. And now I've got a child who held my hand instead of yours in front of a judge, and a woman I stopped. Started again. I'm scared. That's the apology. I let you both all the way in, and I never once told you. Because if you knew, you could leave. And I'd find out a closed door makes the same soft sound no matter who's on the other side of it. Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You're really slow, Dean." I looked at her. "You think I ran to your door at midnight because of a deadbolt?" She said, "Junie ran to you because you were the one man who fixed something for us and didn't make us feel like we owed him for it. I ran after her because I was terrified, and then I stayed a month in your spare room and let you cook me food that should be illegal, and listened to you bolt your own door against your empty house, and somewhere in there I stopped being terrified. And you want to apologize to me for letting us in." She shook her head. "You didn't save me by fixing things, Dean. You saved me by being a door that stayed open when every other one in my life clicked shut soft. I knew the day you cut my daughter a key to nothing, just so she'd feel in charge of something. I've just been waiting for you to catch up." She leaned over and kissed me. There on the shop steps under the buzzing light, soft and slow and certain, tasting like the cheap coffee from the diner, and like something I'd quit believing was still being handed out to men like me. I kissed her back like a man who'd been holding the door for 26 years, and had finally been told he could come inside too. When we pulled apart, she put her forehead against mine and said the thing that made it true going forward, the thing that reached all the way back to a Tuesday in October. "You don't have to keep it open against the dark anymore," she said. "There's people inside now. That's what the lock's for. You told me that yourself." That fall, the apartment over the shop stopped being the apartment over the shop and started being where we lived. We talked about the duplex on Carter Street and decided against it. The town liked having us all in one place, and the truth is, so did we. I changed the sign after all. I'd told Earl I'd leave it, and I left it 8 years. But Earl was gone, and the man I'd been when I bought the place was gone too. So one Saturday I climbed up with Junie holding the ladder, and we added a line under Hartwell Lock and Key. It said "in family." Junie picked the words. She said it was true now, so it should be on the sign. Nora quit the second job at the diner and kept the first one because she liked the people. She and Della between them ran half the gossip in Hartwell out of the laundromat by spring. The envelope of rent money in my desk drawer I gave back to her on the day we got married at the courthouse. 11 months after a little girl knocked at my door at midnight, she opened it, counted it, called me an idiot, and used it for the honeymoon, which was 3 nights at a cabin on the lake, because neither of us wanted to be far from Junie that long. The adoption went through the following spring. Junie was 9 by then. She'd had a real key to a real door for over a year, and on the day the papers were signed, she handed me a brass blank she'd cut herself, slightly crooked, the cuts not quite even, and said it was the key to her room and that I was in charge of locking it now, that it was my job. I have it on my ring still. It doesn't open anything. It's the most important key I own. There are nights now, plenty of them, when the noise of the place is almost too much for a man who spent so long in the quiet, Junie practicing the recorder, the radio in the kitchen, Nora laughing with her whole face at something on the television, the small, constant racket of being someone's people. I'll get up sometimes and go down and stand in the dark shop among the rows of blank keys, just to hear it from a little further off, the way you stand back to look at a thing you built. And I'll do what I do. I'll turn the deadbolt on the front door, the one I anchored into the stud myself, my one small promise to the dark that everyone in this building matters to me. Except now, it's true. Now there's something behind the door worth locking it for. I used to believe my whole life would be other people's doors. Keys cut for strangers, bolts thrown for houses I'd never sleep in, a man going home every night to lock himself in alone against nothing. The way you guard an empty room out of a habit you can't name, but a little girl with a broken zipper and a brass key knocked at midnight and asked me for the one thing I'd spent my whole life convinced I'd never get to give. And I have learned, the slow way, the only true thing about my trade I never knew when I started. A lock was never about keeping the world out. It was always about the moment you finally have people inside. And you turn the bolt, and for the first time in your life, the thing you're keeping safe is your own.